you film and photograph in-house for companies, correct?
Yeah. So I've done that since about 2010, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And so usually what happens is you find a cycle of companies decide that they realize they're spending quite a lot of money on hiring agencies.
Mm-hmm.
And they think, oh, you know what would be really good is if we brought someone in to do that inside that we don't have to pay per day.
Oh, interesting. So instead of paying like a freelance rate, it's kind of just, we have a set salary or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I have a set salary. If I was working every day as a freelancer, I would make more. But I think on the whole, over the course of a year, I get I get salary, I get holiday days, I get
and security,
pension part, and job security,
yeah, for sure. Oh, very cool. So first of all, how did you get into that? So let's just start from the beginning, your background. So, did you go to school? Are you self-taught?
It's a mix. It's a weird mix of both. So I went to school, and then I went to university for advertising, and I learned to be an art director there. And then as I came out of university, the 2008 financial crash happened, where everyone then cut all of their media spends.
Yeah.
So I did I got a job for 3 months as a contractor doing web development for a company in house. And then after that, I just kind of lived off the money of that for about 6 months until eventually I needed to actually start working again. So after a brief stint of working in a cinema, I got a job working for my local newspaper, which was like a free weekly newspaper, but it covered 40 different paper areas in the bit where I lived of England. And I taught myself enough Photoshop at university that they were like, oh, okay, we can use you. You can just edit photos for the newspaper and make sure they look fine.
Yeah.
From there, I got working with the photographers, and then I started taking photos for the newspaper. And after about a year of that, I found a job at a TV channel where they figured that my knowledge of photography and Photoshop was so high, they could just teach me video. And so I was then working for a TV channel in the switch over from broadcast TV to digital, learning how to film behind the scenes for online extra content.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah. And then after that, it was kind of another TV station for a bit. I then went and worked in fashion for a couple of years, and then decided that I didn't like that very much. So I got a lot of practical skills of lighting for photography there.
Yeah.
And then moved out of, and problem solving actually, and then moved out of that, worked in local government for the London Underground. And then now I've moved over to Sweden.
Oh, very cool. So just out of curiosity, which do you prefer, the photography or videography?
Photography, 100%. I am. Anyone who has worked with me will tell you I work as much as I can to make sure that I do all the photography and as little videography as possible.
Very cool. So, I've noticed a lot of your work kind of has a almost like a National Geographic sort of vibe. Some of your stuff is obviously very I guess corporate, for lack of a better word, because that is
it has to be, yeah.
Right. But then I noticed, I guess maybe some of your stuff that you kind of do for yourself, like some of the photos of people that you have, that has very much like a National Geographic sort of vibe. Did you ever want to work for Nat Geo? Was that ever kind of in the cards for you?
I don't know if it was on the cards. It was something that I probably wanted to do. I kind of do a lot of. I'm very big on journalism. Photojournalism. So I describe myself as annoyingly passionate about the role of photography in journalism. I'm very much a stickler for a lot of rules around it, especially when we're getting towards AI now.
Yeah.
And one of my jobs, we're working in house, is being the kind of barometer for what isn't acceptable when delivering photography to journalists, because that's my job. My job is to create photos for journalists to use. So I also have just suddenly gotten into the side hustle of, I went and got a press card here in Sweden not too long ago, so that I could then just go cover news stories and sporting events as and when I wanted to, and have them published wherever.
Yeah, that's really cool. That's awesome. So so kind of who were your influences and your mentors and people that kind of taught you to do what you do now?
Oh, so I mean, on the photography side, it was I think I said this in an interview a long time ago. A lot of the guys I worked with on the local newspaper were the people who kind of kind of gave me the photographic eye and kind of that bug. And I still, one or two of them are still professional photographers, and so I still follow what they're doing and keep tabs on them because they're the ones that I'm still judging my work against, even though. Yeah. I think we're easily on the same level. Yeah. Then in terms of like other work, I watch a lot of TV and films, and so a lot of my stuff is informed probably by what I see, either on TV or films, or actually on YouTube as well. Because of the fact that I work in online content for a company, I try to keep in touch with everything that's going on online in the video space and in the creative space to make sure that I can kind of look at what style is kind of in and what kind of genres and what platforms are being pushed. And, because we had the whole move away from long form video to short form video, and then from short form video to very corporate video, and then from very corporate video to kind of making everything look like it's shot on a phone.
Yeah. I guess that's kind of where the industry in general is kind of in that space now, of trying to make it look, optimized for social media and optimized for YouTube, and kind of shot on iPhone style.
Yeah, you kind of almost don't want people to know that it was shot by a company.
Interesting.
You want it to feel like it
authentic.
I think people don't necessarily. I've got a theory that people don't necessarily look to what account the video comes from or the content comes from in some cases. And so if you can make it feel authentic, people will still come back for that content thinking that, okay, maybe it's not a guy like me who sits in an office all day coming up with stuff like this and is designing all of these platforms to work this way. It's it can be creators that we're bringing in. And in some cases it is that way.
So there's one photo on your website that obviously piqued my interest, and I wrote down a note. I was like, I have to ask you about this. And there's a photo. I assume that's who it is. It's Ian McKellen.
The Ian McKellen one. Yeah.
What's the story behind that? Because obviously, one does not simply take a photo of Gandalf without
one does. One of my favorite things about that photo is I looked through the metadata for that shoot, and that entire shoot lasted 70 seconds. So it was for in the UK they have a city bike scheme, which is sponsored by a bank. So it's effectively they're colloquially known as Boris bikes because Boris Johnson was the mayor and he brought them in. But I worked for the public body that was responsible for them, and when London Pride came around, they would put rainbow wraps on the bikes, and then they would get someone to pose with the bike. And for that one, it was Sir Ian McKellen. We went to his house, and that is shot kind of in the park across from where he lives.
Oh, really?
So we set up in this park. We were going to set up in a different location, but there were some people using the kind of bandstand that we wanted to. So we just kind of set up kind of at the back of the park, and then someone went and got him, and he came down. I'm like 80% certain he'd only just woken up. But he was really lovely. Like he posed for the picture. We took a few quick pictures, and then I knew that he didn't want to be there for too long because he probably had quite a lot to do. He's a very busy man. And so I tried to wrap the shoot within about 15-20 seconds. I like to work quickly. And to be honest, I didn't want him to be there any more than he needed to be. But then the people from the company that sponsor the scheme asked if they could have a photo with him. So we had to very quickly do that. But he was very kind. As he walked past, he patted me on the shoulder and said, "Thank you for making that so brief."
That's awesome.
I did want to do one more thing with him that I didn't because I figured it didn't feel like the right thing to ask at the time, which was those bikes are obviously metal and he was Magneto. So I wanted to just get him posing kind of with his hands above his head as if he was, and then I would Photoshop the bike above his head floating. Unfortunately, I didn't feel that the timing was right to ask him.
That's so cool though. That's I was looking at your portfolio and I saw that. I was like, wait a second. Is that how I think that is?
I've met I've had some real good opportunities to meet some really interesting people. I mean, Ian McKellen was one. There's a couple of other high level celebrities in Britain usually. That I don't think they didn't translate anywhere else. They have that status in Britain. There was a few of those, and like soccer players. Zlatan Ibrahimovic in Sweden. I met him actually in Italy on a job as well. So I've had the good fortune to meet a very wide selection of people, including world leaders, which is a bit weird when you're standing in a room with a prime minister or something.
Yeah. So you were working for the government, taking photos, for what purpose? Like for promotional purposes, for press, or a little bit of both?
I was in the marketing department, but I also worked for the press department, the press office. Okay. So it was specifically around transport for London. So it's like the London Underground, taxis, the double-decker buses,
got it,
the boats and the bikes, kind of all of those modes of transport. I was part of the team that sat in-house creating a lot of the content for them that was used on social or in newspapers or anything like that.
Oh, got it. That's really cool. It's very different.
That was a fun job.
Yeah, it's the kind of thing like, obviously someone has to be doing it, but it's one of those things you don't really think about. Like you kind of take these things for granted. You see, whatever, the London Underground poster someplace. You're like, okay, like, yeah, you don't think about where these pictures come from, but Well,
also you have to think about the practicality of it as well. I had to be trained I had to have a qualification in being able to walk on rails, because the London Underground is probably a bit like the subway system in New York or something. It's a third electrified rail.
Yeah.
So we have to qualify to be able to walk on those rails safely and know all of the safety protocols for if anything goes wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you can find yourself alone on a section of track and you're in trouble if you don't know what you're doing.
Right. Yeah. I guess that's a good point. But what's kind of like the protocol for that? I know it's like not as exciting as the photography, but just interesting.
I mean, there's a weird one where if you are in between two, the weirdest one, because like you try and find safety no matter where you are, but 55% of the London Underground is above the ground, so you're never in a tunnel. Or you're in a tunnel like half the time.
Yeah.
If you're in one of the above ground sections, this is a really weird nerdy fact, and I don't recommend that anyone who ever hears this ever acts on this. But if you find yourself between two trains that are coming from separate directions, the advice I got was to lie down.
Interesting.
Because the wind, the turbulence from both trains could knock you into either one. So if you're lying down between the tracks, you're in the safest position. It's not the safest position, but it's safer than standing up.
If you find yourself in that position,
if that saves one life. But I mean, I overall, from working that job, I am one of the big believers in do not photograph on railway tracks ever, unless you have specific permission and training to be there. The amount of people that you see doing those photo shoots on train tracks, I'm like, no, don't do it. Tracks are bad.
Yeah. It's funny, like people are like, "Oh, it's so artsy," but I guess.
I mean, I did it enough for one lifetime.
So how'd you kind of get into that position? Because that's kind of definitely a unique position to find yourself in. It's not like it's not something that you're average person could just kind of think like, "I'm going to go work for the government to photograph the trains and whatnot." So how'd you kind of find yourself in that position?
Yeah, I think it was probably. I had that background as kind of like a local photojournalist, and then when I started working at the TV channel, I was making a lot of content in-house. And so you kind of slowly discover that every company does need in-house content producers. They don't... I think a lot of people don't know how to find those jobs because they're specifically looking for jobs titled photographer, videographer, graphic designer, video editor. And I don't think a lot of people are aware that companies don't often use those terms specifically because especially large companies have very siloed ways of naming jobs. And so I mean, the weirdest one was the one for the government. My job title was Visual Services Executive. That was my actual job title, which wouldn't tell you anything about having to make content.
Right.
And that's kind of how I ended up falling into it, because I would find these jobs. I would use the keywords of like looking for photography and looking for content specifically and content production. And then I would, it's like applying for a normal job. I mean, I would have a portfolio, but more often than not, they'd be looking at my resume. And then there would be like a skills test. Like I know like people in software get those all the time, but you get it if you do creative. You have to end up doing some sort of Photoshop and video test.
Right. Interesting. So it's so like how, if you, let's say somebody's listening and they're a photographer, a cinematographer, and they would want to get into something like that, what are some of like the keywords you'd be looking for to find these kind of, off the beaten path careers?
Content production, I think, is usually the biggest one. Content production, creative production. I think you can get away with searching photography and videography because a lot of the times they'll put those as required skills. Similarly, I think if you type in software that you use, so I mean, coming out when I did into the industry, Adobe was the standard for everything. It kind of still is, but some people use DaVinci and some people use other things. But I mean, if you look for jobs that use Photoshop or Premiere Pro, just Adobe or the Adobe suite in the keywords, you'll often find them that way. The only problem I've ever had is I used to be a picture editor. That was one of the job titles I held. And if you search the word picture, you end up with about 1 billion different results for people saying that you have to be able to see the big picture in a job ad. So it's not helpful.
Yeah. I'm curious because do you work? I'm not sure if you work there now. Volvo. Are you working there currently, or you work there in the past?
Yeah, I work there currently.
So I was looking at some of like the Volvo photos. It's very cool. Some of these pictures you're taking. So what's kind of? And I saw the video you had sent me. Kind of demonstrating some of the tests that they put the cars through and that. But then also some of the photos you have were very cool because, you're taking pictures of crash tests and the production line. So what's kind of the goal that they are seeking to achieve? Obviously the video, I get what their idea is there, but let's say for photos, what's kind of the idea behind getting these photos? Is it for, magazines and for, like auto shows and stuff of that nature, just to kind of...
It's mainly for magazines and newspapers because usually I get sent out when it's with regard to a specific news story. So if it's a crash test, you can't always have journalists come and set up cameras for crash tests. Crash tests are exceptionally dangerous things. And they're very complicated. And so in order to photograph them, there is a lot of steps you've got to go through and a lot of you've got to know where to be, you've got to know where to stand, you've got to know, again, safety protocols for how the crash lab works. The people who run the test have to trust you enough to know that you're not going to put yourself in danger and put anyone else in danger.
Right.
Likewise, I mean, it's the same for the factories. You have to know exactly kind of where to stand and where you can and can't be, and so you're not going to get hit by something or get in the way of a robot.
Right.
But the end goal is we want to supply the journalists with the imagery they need to tell the story that we're trying to tell, and we want to make it as easy for them to tell that story while also kind of being able to keep the look and feel of the imagery the way that we want it to, because you get 100 people to take a photo of a car. That car is going to be 100 different colors. I mean, it's going to be the same general color, but depending on color balance, what angle you're looking at it, it's going to be the same. So you kind of need to look at things like that of kind of what angles do we kind of agree that the car should be photographed from? What color should it be? And if you photograph something in a factory, for example, and this is true of anywhere I've worked, especially in big industrial sites, you need to make sure that anything you capture in the image isn't A, proprietary, so you're not giving away a secret,
right?
And B, there isn't someone in the background who is accidentally doing something they shouldn't be. It could be casually glancing at the phone, could be that they've taken their helmet off to scratch their head. You don't want to capture that and have it broadcast anywhere. This is a much bigger problem in terms of like railway lines and stuff like that. Like when I was working for Transport for London, that was a huge thing in terms of how we had to be very careful of how people were pictured for safety reasons. But the main reason is just so that you don't want 20 journalists with cameras running around unsupervised in a space that could cause injury to someone.
Yeah, that makes sense.
It's easier to, and also it's cheaper to send me in a lot of cases.
Yeah. Right, because if they have you already kind of on the payroll as opposed to,
I'm able to travel to these places. I have the correct qualifications to go in and kind of wander around without having to be chaperoned, or handheld too much. You can put one person with me to just kind of make sure that I'm not getting completely lost or walking into a giant oven. But otherwise, kind of, I'm fairly good to roam around. But also, the other thing that we can do in-house that's quite useful is we keep the images. We have this whole library of images.
Mm-hmm.
So, if you invite a photographer in from a news agency, they're going to take a load of great photos, but those great photos are going to sit on the archive of that agency. Yeah. If we have all of that imagery in-house, we can reuse it for, untold different things. Especially, like, I went to the US to go shoot a load of stuff in a factory recently, or last year even, but all of that stuff can be reused anytime we tell a story about that factory.
Right, because you already have the photos. So do you specifically use photos you haven't used already, or not even necessarily? You can reuse the same photos that have already been published.
No, you can reuse the same photos that have already been published as long as people aren't sick of them. Yeah, if you hear back that people are a bit sick of the same 6 images going out, then you do have to shoot new ones.
Right.
But in a lot of cases, I can go into a factory. You can put me in there all day, and you'll get per day probably 50 finished images out of the day. Mm-hmm. So if I'm in there a week, you'll get 200, 250, and then that's a library of images that we can probably keep for a good couple of years. Especially, what's really important is if the factory is starting to produce something new, as long as if you get there early enough and shoot everything and shoot hundreds of images, then the whole lifetime of that project, you can use those images over and over again. And because we only probably give out 5 at a time, you've got quite a long longevity on how long that one shoot can last you. Right,
that makes sense. I one time, just talking about like with the factories, I one time did a tour of the Harley Davidson factory over in York, Pennsylvania. And it's amazing to see like this machinery, And so there were kind of 2 options. There was the standard tour, and then they had what's called the steel-toed tour. You had to like wear, protective equipment to go around, and you're saying, like, if you're just some random guy who's walking around and doesn't know what's what, you could this machinery is just insanely powerful, and one wrong move and you'll be an offender. You know what I'm saying? Like, these things are it's a really cool job, because like I said, it's not your typical kind of photography gig. Most photographers are kind of weddings, or kind of people think of photography in the more portrait or landscape setting, and not so much in the, like I was saying, the corporate setting. And kind of for these big organizations and these big companies that they do need the photos taken. Someone's got to do it. So I'm curious, like, first of all, how long have you been into photography? Is this kind of your whole life you've been dabbling in photography, or is it something that you kind of picked up later on as kind of a career path?
It was a weird thing that I kind of fell backwards into almost. I started off when I was at university. They taught us Photoshop, and I got really into learning how to use Photoshop to edit stuff. And then I thought to myself, after a while, and working at the newspaper, kind of editing photos, I thought, if I get a camera and start shooting my own photos, then I can basically shoot stuff that I want to put into edits. It makes everything a lot easier. I don't have to find images. I can just shoot them myself. Mm-hmm. And then I kind of started shooting stuff and went, oh no, I really, really enjoy this. This is actually really fun. And so I kept doing it. I was the picture editor at the newspaper I worked at was really good, and he just like, if you want to go shoot football, sport, go shoot that.
Oh, nice.
And shoot small news stories and just do little bits here and there, and he would kind of give me little critiques.
Yeah.
And I never really stopped. It kind of just kept going. And I spend a disproportionate amount of time looking up stuff about photography. If I go to a museum, I'm not that interested in paintings and sculptures. I will go to a photography exhibition any day of the week. It's just the thing that has become my passion.
Yeah.
and I'm really glad that I get to do it all the time.
Yeah, that's amazing, and it's great when you get to do what you love. That's it's a game changer. I have two questions. I kind of go in two different paths, but so I kind of have to like pick one. But I'm curious to hear from you. What makes a good photo? Obviously it's composition, all these things, but in your professional opinion, what are you looking for in a photograph? Especially, let's put your work aside for a second. And you're saying when you go to a museum, you're looking at the photo exhibitions. What makes a good photo when somebody else is doing it?
Yeah. Okay. I have two answers for this. One is related to kind of when I'm talking purely about journalism. Which is that you're telling, and it can relate to most other things, other forms of photography, which is that you can tell the whole story in a single image. I try and use the fact that I don't believe people read captions as kind of the narrative in my head when I'm taking a photo. I mean, because everything I do, especially at work, I don't usually get that much time to set stuff up. Like with the Ian McKellen thing, I had 70 seconds with him. I've had a lot of the time I'm capturing stuff that I see, so it's about anticipating what's going to happen, standing in the right place, and getting the shot. Because you only get one chance. A crash test only happens once. You don't get a chance to repeat that photo. You have to get it right. But I mean, ultimately, I think the kind of less educated and considered answer is, in my head, I just want to shoot things that look cool. Yeah. And if I look at an image and I go, "Oh, that's cool," and that can be. I mean, I've got 3 posters in front of me right now that are all really cool images, and they're all very, very different. But that's it's about being attention grabbing, I guess, and I think that kind of works. That's kind of a bridge for both. The image, I was always kind of told, and it's switched now to obviously scrolling and the timings are different, but if you were looking through pages, you have like 2 seconds to grab someone's attention with an image. Right. And so you don't necessarily need to tell the whole story with that image, but you need to basically have something cool that is maybe, if you don't have text, the visual equivalent of clickbait. Right. For that makes sense. That's
Yeah. It's interesting because, like, just to focus on what you were saying about with people not like, or at least you don't anticipate people reading the caption, but then when you look at portrait photography, right? Like, for example, like the first one that comes to mind is like Humans of New York, right? Where obviously he's taking photos that are attention grabbing in the sense that he's very good at setting up the shot but without reading the caption, you wouldn't know the story behind the photo. So how do you kind of balance like telling the story, but also pulling people in to the point where they have to where they want to hear more,
Yeah, I mean, I think it can be wholly dependent on each kind of genre. Portraits especially are difficult because you want to reflect someone, and so you've kind of got to capture part of who they are and encapsulate that in the image. You're never going to be able to do as much as kind of the whole text that they have in Portraits of New York. But then I think it kind of goes back to my point about being kind of visual clickbait. You get them in with the image and then you have the story. Yeah. So my thing about people not reading captions is that I don't believe people read captions all the time with an image. Like every time you look at an image, I don't believe people are looking at the captions. But I believe if you treat the Humans of New York thing as an article rather than a caption, you're pulling them in with that image, and then they're kind of coming to the text after that.
Yeah, that makes sense. I hear that. So how do you achieve that with in the corporate world? With Volvo and with the London Underground and these things that are, again, more what's a good word? More cut and dry almost, and more kind of it is what it is. It's not like you're taking a photo of a landscape or of animal photography. It's kind of, and also I assume that you have less creative freedom, right? Because they need a certain image portrayed, right? So you don't necessarily have as much freedom to kind of do artistic shots as what's the word? Like useful, like there's I'm trying to think of the word.
It's
you know what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I think actually I've now reached a stage in my career where I do have quite a lot of creative freedom in kind of what we do, and I can kind of dictate the style of imagery.
Oh, nice.
But I think when I'm thinking mainly about it is I try and think of what I think in that space that I'm standing in at that moment stands out the most.
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's contrast works really well a lot of the time. One of the things I do is I do a lot of live events coverage for launches of things, and so that is a person standing on a stage.
Right.
There's only so many ways you can tell that story. But what started to happen now is you start to see giant LED screens for presentations behind, and so I try and find ways of working in. I think on my website you actually see that now you've got these hugely, actually they're probably my photos on the background with a person standing in front of them, and then you're kind of trying to frame them within that. I'm going for layers now. I've reached that stage. But I ultimately I think again what I'm looking for is depth. I guess that's the only thing you can really do is you can start playing with depth and layers, and that kind of just adds visual interest, and that's kind of what I try and think of. So if you're sitting in a crowd, you have the silhouetted heads of people, and then you have the speaker who's lit, and then you have a screen behind them doing something else, and then you've kind of got all of these layers so that there's kind of visual interest. You can have leading lines, you can kind of obscure part of the frame, and you can just try all sorts of little tricks that just add something to the image so that it doesn't feel very clinical. And it's you're trying to bring a little bit of drama into a scenario that maybe doesn't have any.
Right. Yeah, like I would say, like in some of your photos of like within the car factory, there is definitely there's kind of this like a drama aspect to it. Even though you think like it's a car factory, like how much can you really put to it? But I see what you're saying. Like there really is kind of something about it that does kind of that portrays drama, even though again it's it's a car on a conveyor
if you have a
belt,
person
essentially.
If you have a person, it really helps, because there are some images where it's like people really applying fine detail to the work they're doing, and so you can see where their eyes are looking, you can see how concentrated they are, and you can see their hands in these very fine positions doing something very kind of skilled that I could never do because my hands are not steady enough to do it.
You're a photographer, you gotta have steady hands.
No, in-body image stabilization. Why do you need steady hands?
That's true.
But yeah, but then if you've got just the object, then you've got to try and find different ways of making it a bit more dramatic. So one big way that I like is sparks. If something is being welded and there's a spark, you will notice that a lot of I will have been standing there for minutes trying to get that exact moment, like just timing it and just firing until I get the right spark.
Yeah.
Or some sort of movement in the image, or there is a robot arm somewhere doing something. There is always something doing. There is always something in the images doing something. There
is a story element to it.
Yeah, something has to be happening in order for the image to exist. Well, I mean, there's probably 10,000 images sitting on a hard drive of stuff where nothing is happening, and then the 200 that I've got, this is when things happened.
Right.
But when I'm walking through, like especially with a factory, if I'm walking through a factory, as I'm walking around, because we get shown around before kind of we start shooting everything, we need to know where everything is, and a lot of the time we have to wait for the right the right cars or the right people to be in the right positions for us to do anything. So we get shown around. Yeah. And as we're walking around, we kind of go, okay, well, this is an opportunity, that's an opportunity, because we can see this happening. Okay, how do we capture that? Can we, we ask, can we go stand there? Where can we stand? Where can't we stand?
I guess in a factory, it's it's the same things happening repeatedly, so you can kind of catch the rhythm of it and figure out what's
production lines are great. They're fantastic for that. Because then not only do you get the chance to watch it happen, but you can then go trial and error different places to stand.
Right.
Especially, I mean, with some scenarios, factories will build different cars at the same time, like the same brand but different models, and so we are there to photograph one specific thing, maybe one specific model. Yeah. We will practice with the cars that are coming off ahead of it to just make sure that we can get the timing right. We can figure out what people are doing and where they're standing, and then who's going to be doing what, so we know to focus on that person.
Yeah, that's cool. No, it's really interesting. It's very unique what you do. It's very different than your typical photography. So let me ask you, like, what's your preference of photography in terms of kind of job aside? What do you enjoy making or photographing? Is it people? Is it items? Is it locations? Is it animals?
I think mine is, for me, it's just kind of recording what I see effectively. I don't know if there's a specific, like, I mean, I for a while, I was very big into just doing portraits. That was my thing. And I still really like making portraits. It's a huge thing I love doing. But now kind of I'm really on a big reportage kick at the moment, a big kind of journalistic kick of, okay, how can you tell it? I the reason it came about, actually, I can tell this story because it's slightly more interesting. I did a job where I was working for Transport for London, and Leon Neal, who is currently one of the photographers for Getty, was doing a job as well. He was working the same job. We were shooting the same station as it was being kind of shown off before it was open to the public. And I was going around getting my shots and feeling pretty good with myself about what press shots I got. And then he showed me the back of his camera, everything that he'd gotten throughout the day. And I went, oh, okay, so we've been standing in exactly the same places, and you have seen a completely different world to me, and the world you've seen is fantastic, and I wish I had seen it. And so now that's kind of what I'm trying to focus on is how, I have a camera that I carry on me in my pocket every day.
Right.
And so if I see something that I'm like, okay, I need to be able to capture this, even if it's just as mundane as the corner of a park, which I know is an overdone shot, but like the corner of a parking space with like a wire going through it, or something that's just that visually interesting thing that gets my attention. I'm like, right, that's what I need to capture, because
it's interesting. I was gonna say, like, I definitely have noticed, like, just as an example, like the other day I was walking my son to school, and like there's just this kind of like this moment where he was walking, there's like this, like nice brick wall behind him, and the way I saw it, like I was like, oh, this like would make a really cool photo, but from how you see it to then how you see it once you photograph it is not one to one. It doesn't translate the same way. It's a really interesting thing, because you think, like, what do you mean? Like, I see it, I take a picture of it, and you look at the picture, you're like, what? This is totally not at all, what I had envisioned. And
part of my job is to do that, is to capture that. So it's to look at these situations and then go, okay, this is how I need to capture this in order for it to kind of, this is what I'm seeing in my head, and this is how I can capture it.
Yeah.
And so, and I feel like under the pressure of, I have to focus on this because this is the only time I've got this chance to do this.
Right.
I work really well at that, but then the second you kind of put me into a free situation where I don't have any pressure on me, I'm like, maybe I won't bother taking the photo. It's fine. I can. It's not that good. It's not worth it. But no, I think, and I want to kind of not have to be under that pressure all the time in order to be able to get those things.
Yeah, no, for sure. But I guess that's a good quality to have if you're working in press, because I mean, these newsworthy events kind of happen, once in a while. That's why they're news, and so. You have that kind of, it's like you get it or you don't, and if you miss it, then that's it. It's not happening again.
Yeah, and I think there's kind of I think a lot of people get, a lot of new photographers, especially who are trying to do stuff, get bogged down in, I've missed the opportunity, and it's like, no, you don't, not necessarily. There could be another one if you just keep watching for long enough. Something else might happen. Or I mean, I'm always of the. I had a discussion about imposter syndrome with a colleague of mine, who is a fantastic writer, incredible writer, and said he really suffers from imposter syndrome. And he asked me, kind of, do you ever suffer from it? And I just went, no. I said, you put a camera in my hand, I have all the confidence in the world that I will get what I need to get with that camera. Yeah. I don't know why that's the case.
Yeah.
But I know that in my head, I know, okay, something is about to happen.
Yeah.
There will be photos of it. Whether the photos of it are the best photos in the world, they're probably not going to be. But are they going to be up to a standard where I'm happy with them? Like 90% of the time, yes. And so even if I'm feeling nervous about a shoot going into it, I know that the second that everything's happening, I'm confident enough in my own skills that I know what I'm doing, I'll get a shot.
Right. I'm curious to hear, and I hope you don't take offense by this question, but how much do you feel like photography, how much do you feel of it is you creating a piece of artwork versus you capturing something that's there? Like, so I'm coming from kind of like a sculpting background, so for me it's, very much like I'm making things that my hands, I'm really putting my hands on the thing and creating something to, look how I want it. Whereas with photography, I feel like it's less of me doing the thing and more of me like you're saying, capturing the thing and capturing it in just the right way. But it's almost, and again, I hope you don't take offense by me saying this, but like, is that, do you agree with that sentiment, or do you feel that there is a lot of a creative input with photography?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you think back to what I was saying a minute ago about working with Leon Neal, and us right. being in the same place, capturing the same things, but the application he was using and the way he used his camera made his photos way more arty and dreamy than mine ever could be.
Right.
And I mean, he is probably one of the best photojournalists, kind of, especially in the UK for certain at the moment. That was how he got introduced to me. It was someone else, another photographer came up to me and went, "This is Leon. He's one of the best photographers I've ever met." Okay, cool. But I mean,
thanks.
Yeah, cool. No, it's a good intro. Yeah. But I also worked with a guy who is a Mitch Payne, who's a really good still life photographer. Like, now shoots for Lamborghini and McLaren and Harley probably as well at some points. He and Nike, all of these people. And again, I sat in a studio doing the same job as that guy, and was just baffled by the way that his brain worked and how he was able to use the same stuff that I had to get totally different images.
Yeah. My teacher, who taught me kind of drawing and sculpting and all that stuff, he went to a school, Art Center School of Design in Pasadena, and I remember he told me this story one time. It was about photography, and they went out with one of the teachers for a shoot, and all the kids come with all their fancy cameras and all their gear, and they're like setting up, and they're trying to get all these shots, and the teacher pulls out one of those like disposable cameras, and like I'm not so well versed in photography, so I don't know all the specifics, but he did some sort of trick where, because this disposable camera had nothing to it really, and so he did something where he found a rock that was reflecting the sunlight very strong, and he somehow, like, I guess, used it to help adjust the exposure or something. I don't know. Again, I don't know all the specifics, and he ended up taking this incredible shot with this $10 camera that all these kids with all their fancy gear couldn't even come close to, because I guess the thing that I guess I didn't fully appreciate is the camera really is just a tool for the artist to kind of to use it, because for me, like, using a camera means taking my iPhone and kind of like point and shoot, and I'm not really thinking of it in kind of how adjusting the settings and everything really does affect the outcome of the photo.
Yeah. I mean, I'm a huge I shoot everything manual settings at all time, apart from focus. That's the only thing I kind of don't allow the camera to I allow the camera to dictate focus. Yeah. I don't dictate the focus. I'm not that good. I'm not as good as an autofocus sensor. But I know what I need the image to be, and I don't want the camera making decisions for me on what it thinks the exposure should be at any point. Yeah. And so kind of I don't work in aperture priority, I don't work in shutter priority. I only ever work in manual, because I will just sit there and twiddle my fingers around the dials to make sure that everything is exactly as I need it to be when I take the shot, so that if I do miss something, it's my fault, it's not the camera's. Yeah.
So how much of the work goes in before the shot versus in the post shot?
A lot of it is, I mean, for different things for different amounts for different subjects. When I was working in fashion, like I was working in e-commerce, there was no duty to accurately reflect things. So, you would shoot a handbag, but you would only really bother doing half of it, and then you would flip it horizontally so that the thing was completely symmetrical and looked perfect.
I see.
a lot of that was a lot of Photoshop work. That really helped with my Photoshop work, actually. But now, because what I'm doing, I class as journalism, and we are sending this stuff to, and I know it's corporate PR, and that's a whole different kettle of fish. But
yeah,
I kind of wonder, in the back of my mind, it's kind of like, if it was found out that I was faking images, how would that reflect upon the company? Like, how could someone use that against you?
Yeah. That makes sense.
And so that's
especially when you're dealing with a corporation, like because it's your head they're going to come after.
Yeah, and so I'm a big stickler for stuff. We try not to really have to fake stuff unless it's a physical impossibility to do something. Like it's just not reasonable. Like if it's a product shot of something, then fine, we can do that. But or we use CGI or something like that. But if we're accurately reflecting something, and also like a lot of my job, because it's applying to journalists, it's because journalists want real images.
Right.
They don't want fake images.
Yeah.
They need a car driving. They need to see the car driving. Actually, what is quite funny though is if you, I also take up the role of managing agencies when we have to bring them in for bigger stuff. So in some cases, you will see I am actually the driver of the car for some of the shots that go out.
That's pretty funny. So who's taking the photo then if you're driving?
Oh, we've got a really cool guy called David Shepherd. He comes from the UK. He's a veteran photojournalist for specialising in the auto industry for years.
Oh, cool!
And so we brought him over to help because he's really good at making sure that we get exactly what people want for the specific thing that he's shooting for us for.
Yeah. Oh, very cool. So I have two questions that I want to ask you. So. It's the kind of thing where they both will go in very different directions. So I'm going to ask one, and then I want to circle back to this one because we'll touch on both of them. But the first one I wanted to ask you is like in your career, what are some of the times that you've taken like big creative risks and kind of stepped out of your comfort zone and pushed yourself? That whether it paid off or didn't pay off doesn't really matter, but it's kind of more the process of taking that risk.
I mean the biggest, well, there's been a few. I mean, I got asked to shoot for the Observer, which is the Sunday newspaper for the Guardian in the UK. Mm-hmm. When I lived in the UK, it had always been a dream of mine to get a portrait in the Guardian or the Observer, like shoot something for them. And then during COVID, I kind of got, because I was in Sweden and they couldn't travel for obvious reasons. They asked if I could shoot an image for them as a portrait, and they were just kind of like, just do it in our style. That's all we care about, as long as you do that. So that was where we took a big risk. It was the outgoing CEO. I grabbed him in a 2-minute break that he had from doing a live stream, put him at the end of a production line during a lunch break so nothing was moving and I could put him there, and then very quickly fired off as many shots as I could of him standing at the end of that production line, and we made that work, and that was pretty good. But I think the biggest risk I've taken most recently is the YouTube video I sent you of the test track, the test track we did.
What made that such a big risk?
It was a lot to produce. We had to bring in a company to come and help. It's a company that I work with quite a lot to produce all this stuff. They had to come in and help us. It was several days of shooting. This was essentially for a film that had just started off as being an introduction to what our test track was. And we saw it as what is quite interesting is there are videos for these test tracks, proving grounds as they're called, all around the world. The old one that we had is by far the highest viewed one. Really? But it's about 15 years old, and it needed updating. And we were getting to an anniversary for the proving ground, so we wanted to make a new one. And I thought, well, the old one is shot in a very action movie-esque style. How do we update that? Like, how do we make another version of it that isn't this, but is still a bit fun? Yeah. And then we just went, well, what if we just basically made a Top Gear segment? How would Top Gear do it? Or how would the Grand Tour do it? And so that was kind of what we had in our mind. And then I was supposed to write the treatment for it like a one pager and hand it off to one of our writers so he could develop the script. And then I thought, I actually know I know what this will look like so well. I just wrote the script, the first version of it, and then handed it off to one of our production managers, and then we kind of refined it to include all of the bits that we have to include, because a proving ground 15 years ago was just roads. But it's now a whole thing where you've got like digital versions of the track, and you can do all of this other stuff at the same time. So we wanted to tell all of those stories, and we just kind of went, how can we do this in kind of a slightly fun, slightly tongue-in-cheek, a bit silly way that isn't necessarily in keeping with how we've been doing everything else recently, but does kind of fit in with how we did the last one. You can tangentially say that you can kind of make that excuse if you need to, if you're in front of a room full of people who ask you that question,
right?
I might find myself.
And you directed that? That was your role in that?
I kind of served as executive producer.
Okay, cool.
We had a director who is a director we worked with from the same company, but I was standing next to him, and we would kind of shoot ideas back and forth on how we can do stuff, and then we would do takes, look through it, and go, okay, did this work? Did this not? How do we do this? So
it's very different than your typical photography gigs that you normally are doing.
Yeah, or even the typical gig I do where I'm filming stuff. It's, again, very kind of, one person with a camera just filming stuff to try and get the story done. But this was multiple people, multiple units, crew, special effects.
How'd you enjoy it, being in a producer position?
I do enjoy that. It's kind of strange for me because I'm not doing anything. I feel like I'm just kind of sitting there eating snacks and answering questions and feeling important. But
someone's got to do it, right?
Someone's got to do it. I mean, they bring good catering. I can't argue with that. They want me to eat snacks. It's good. It's a good life. I can understand why people enjoy it. But one thing that I've been told that agencies and photographers who work with us in this capacity really like about the way we work is that the people that we send to the shoots, myself and some of my colleagues, we're working photographers and videographers. We understand all of the lingo. We understand all of the technical limitations. We understand everything that's happening without necessarily being able to exactly see. We understand how production works. So if they need to explain something to us, they don't have to dumb it down. If they have a problem, they don't have to say, well, this is a problem because. They just go, okay, well, the SD card failed. And we're like, okay, right. Just run it again. Let's just do it. How much are we running behind? Blah, blah, blah. On the flip side, they have said that they can't lie to us, though, which makes it a big problem for them, because usually if you're in creative, you can kind of go, that takes 2 weeks to do. It's really complicated. And then one of us will go, no, it doesn't.
Yeah. That's the advantages and disadvantages of working with capable, the capable team.
Yeah, but it's a part of my job I enjoy. Given the opportunity, I would like to shoot everything. But I'm aware of my own limitations. I'm aware of the limitations of what we can achieve.
Right.
There are some exceptionally talented people that we work with who I am always delighted to see whenever they're on shoots, because I think what they bring to what we do and what we need is exactly why we hire them. And so that's why we use them.
Yeah. So let me ask you, just to kind of, this is in the same vein. It's not the question. I do want to circle back to the other question, but I'm still kind of keeping it on hold for a second because it's a little bit of a controversial topic. So we'll come back to it in a minute. But for people who are maybe early on in their career, what's some of your advice for kind of creating and establishing creative relationships that kind of, because obviously it's important, especially in your field, to have those relationships and maintain those relationships, because that's kind of how you grow your career. So what's kind of a blueprint that people can apply to achieve those goals?
That's a good question. I now have to think about how I've done this. Actual self-reflection. I think what I've always been big on, especially if you're doing in-house stuff specifically, you want to make sure that whatever you're doing, even if you're trying to push the boundaries slightly, you need to do it within the framework of knowing, okay, there are walls. We are working inside a box, and for every person that tells you to think outside the box and work outside the box, and every other one of those sayings that gets overused, you are still in someone else's toy box playing with their toys.
Right.
And there are limitations set to that, and so it's about understanding where you can push and where you can't. I have a really good working relationship with certain people that I work with who don't agree with me on the finer things of how things should look, but they understand that my area of expertise is one of their blind spots. And so I can kind of come in and be like, okay, well, I know what you need to happen, and I will try my best to make everything work around the kind of rules that you've put in place. But you have to understand that if I do take a creative liberty, it's because it serves the greater good, and it's something you haven't thought about that I know better. I do not know better, but I understand enough to know that it will work, and it will work for all of us. Right. And so it's kind of that old thing of compromise, but it's a compromise in the form of trying to figure out a way, and it's actually quite a fun creative exercise. It's kind of akin to if you do like a photo a day project, but you have to use the same camera and lens every day, you can't change that perspective. It's kind of, you're locked in with that one thing, but then how do you start pushing that kind of one field of view to do different things? And it's kind of the same thing with the way you work in a corporate environment. There are all of these kind of boxes that you have to kind of work within and hoops you've got to jump through to get stuff done. But how do you do it and still kind of make the best thing possible? It's almost tying your hands behind your back, but I kind of feel like
one hand behind your back.
One hand. If you give people really, but it's like the pressure thing. It's like I work better under pressure for shooting stuff. Right. And I think if you tell people go make whatever you want, they'll get stuck because they don't know what they want to make, or they do know what they want to make, but they don't know how to go about it. But if you say, okay, well, we need you to make this, and we want you to make it however you think is best, but also here are all of the building. This is the budget you've got. This is the product you've got. You're only allowed to use the color red for some reason. We don't know why, but that's just a thing that was in the book today. Mondays we only use red. So that's kind of, and you then find kind of your brain tries to wrap around how to get the thing done within those limitations, and it makes it easier. Right.
It kind of gives you a structure to work within and the scaffolding, but then also kind of, like you're saying, challenges you to be creative within that structure. Yeah, which is I think that's a really good like life skill to have just in general, because even outside of the artistic, just in general to be able to know how to work within a structure but still kind of find your own voice, I think is really important. And, I think if you I think a lot of people in today's day and age don't necessarily have like a scaffolding and structure they kind of live within, and so like you're saying, it's kind of, if you just kind of can do whatever you want all the time, it's kind of like, well, what should I do now? Like you need a little bit of that structure to kind of
and if you can do that, please be an artist, because you are much better at it than I am. So.
Yeah. Okay, so getting back to the question that I've been kind of sitting on, that I really am curious to hear your thoughts. And that is, it's a big topic in my field, because, the illustration and 3D and that kind of thing. And that is the whole topic of AI and, generative AI. Obviously people are worried about it in the, like I was saying, 2D, 3D, where they're kind of designing and creating new ideas and new illustrations, right? But I'm sure it also definitely has an effect, and I'm sure it's very different in the photography world, right? Because, maybe I think the concerns in the photography world, correct me if I'm wrong, especially like in the photojournalism space, it's more of a concern of like, how do we know what to believe anymore type of thing? Whereas by us, it's more like, wait a second, we're getting paid to make new ideas, and if this machine can make ideas for a lot cheaper, so it's a different set of concerns. But I am curious to hear your perspective on it, because I'm sure it's not something that hasn't affected you to at least some extent.
Oh yeah, I mean, I work in a business, so I hear all the time about how I should be using AI to do stuff, and it's kind of like, okay, well, I can use it in certain ways, but again, most of my job is journalistic, so I have to be very careful about the practical applications of using it.
Right.
You know, if I've had experiences in the past where if I was to use someone's voice, and this isn't photography, I know it's videography, but if I was to digitally alter someone's voice to say something else using AI, I feel like that negates the message. Whereas if I needed to redo, like have them do a retake in their phone and then cut that into the audio, or even pick out another bit of audio where they've said the correct thing and put it in, that is wholly them saying it. Yeah, okay, it's chopped up a little bit and we can disguise that. But I think that's a completely different kettle of fish from AI.
Yeah.
And with photography, kind of, in the journalistic space, they're basically just trying to work around the whole thing of kind of like, how do we validate images rather than incorporate AI?
Right. That's the big concern.
Yeah, but for I think I've always been of the opinion that AI is like it's a feature, it's not an actual product.
Mm-hmm.
And so every time I've used it, I think it's fine for ideation and like storyboarding. If I need to storyboard something, I don't like storyboarding. I usually just shoot, especially in video, I will literally just shoot the shots that I know I'm going to edit because I edit the whole thing myself. So there's no point in me putting a storyboard together unless it's to show someone else.
Right.
But you can you can create the imagery for a storyboard with AI potentially, because that would just save some time.
Yeah.
But I'm not that, like, my whole thing about generative AI is, I think what's interesting about any form of artwork, be it like sculpture, 3D, anything like photography, video, is that it's a person creating that and trying to tell you something. And, you know, okay, granted, I'm doing corporate imagery, but the corporate imagery, I'm still trying to tell you a story, and I'm trying to tell you what I see and how I'm perceiving this event in a way, or how I want you to perceive it.
Yeah.
And because there's none of that in anything that generative AI really does, it kind of just feels a bit boring to me. And I've always wanted to write this article to send to a photography blog that's just titled "AI is boring and I'm tired of pretending it's not."
Yeah,
because it kind of is. It's just you hear a lot. The people that really push it aren't the people making stuff. There is, I mean, you know, when they first announced Sora, there was they gave some artists access to it to make stuff, and there was that person who made the film about the person who had a balloon for a head. Yeah, yeah, and that was fantastic. Like that, but again, that was someone making something using it as a tool. It wasn't
exactly.
It wasn't someone just typing in whole film about balloon for a head. It was iterative and all of that, and so I've kind of gone through the whole. I think I've gone through all of the stages of grief or acceptance or whatever it is that AI exists within. I'm not convinced that it's going to come for me. Right. If it does, cool. If I can monetize it so that I'm still getting paid somehow, fantastic.
Even better.
But my feeling is that the world is still going to, from a selfish point of view, the world is still going to need images of things that are actually happening, like real images. Right. People are going to want to see exactly what happened. They're not going to want to see an AI representation of it for news purposes. Right. I also kind of feel the same way about art. I think people are more drawn to art created by people than art created by machines. Art created by machines doesn't really seem to serve a purpose. Yeah. I could be wrong. If a machine somehow created a miraculous piece of art that changed the way I thought about it, then that's done its job. But I haven't hit that point yet. Right. And so I don't think it's at the point where it's going to cause that much of an issue. And I'm not wholly convinced, because it's just parroting at the moment. It's not independently creating stuff. Right. If it's just parroting stuff, then cool. Okay, that's a nice parlor trick. My dog can do tricks too, but I don't pretend that's going to be the greatest revolution in technology. Right. That's a very well articulated argument, and I agree. I really do think that it is a tool. I mean, maybe this is the cynic in me, but I feel that tools like Sora, the way I see them kind of playing out, is that, you know, if let's say you're texting a friend and you want to send them a GIF or GIF, depending how you say it, you know, and you can't find one that's just. Do you have a commitment to how you say that? That's my question for you. I say GIF. I say it's an argument between me and my wife. She says GIF. I say GIF. but I feel that, like,
So it'd be like, let's say I want something super specific that I can't find. So I could type in like, give me a monkey making a balloon animal, and throwing it off of a roof, and so, okay, get like a little clip. Because, all the stuff that I've seen so far, some of it's good, I don't know if good's even, I don't know if I'd say good, like definitely not great. It's passable to good, somewhere in that range, and like, I was having this conversation with the 3D artist the other day, talking about how it is a good kind of jumping off point, and it's good to ideate, and it's good to kind of, like my teacher always says, it's called mid-journey because it gets you half the way there.
That's nice. Oh, I'm going to use that.
It's true. Like, yeah, okay, it's a good place. It's a good kind of jumping off point, but by no means is it usable out of the box, and so, and also there's the whole other aspect of kind of what makes art is, the emotion and, story and feelings that are infused into it. That's what really makes art interesting. And, and when you see a really good piece of art, it kind of touches you in a place that you can't put your finger on, and I think you need to have that in order to be able to, do that to somebody else, and
yeah, exactly. But that's like I said, if somehow I improved at some point that a machine has made a piece of art that moves me, I'll be like, okay, cool. I am now. It's moved me to the point where I have reconsidered my whole thing on the way that works. But for now, no, it's not going to.
I was going to say, at the point that happens, we have bigger discussions to have than
exactly.
Artwork, I think. Yeah. But I know like a lot of people in like my industry are very, very upset about AI, and I understand the fears and and the concerns, and not to take away from that, but I think in a lot of ways, just to bring it to like photography, it would be like saying when they switched from like film to digital photography, it's like, oh, this is the end because now people who develop film are going to be out of a job. It's like, not quite, it's a new tool, and okay, maybe you have to make some adjustments in your work process, but ultimately it's going to help you, right? It's going to ultimately speed up your process, right? Because you don't have to go stand in a dark room, what's the word? Developing your film.
Exactly.
You could have it just ready instantly. So that's kind of my outlook on it as well. And it's interesting. I mean, I don't know if people are going to take this the wrong way, but I find that the people who seem to be most concerned about it are people who are the least, not skilled, but like people who are kind of lower down on the totem pole. Right, as in like those are the people who seem to be the most concerned about. The people who are well established in their field and are really experts of their craft seem to be very much not bothered by it. And I don't know if it's because those are the people who have more job security, right? So therefore, they feel like, oh, it's going to come from them last, or if it's they kind of see things in the bigger picture, and it's like you're saying, it's a tool, it's not a replacement, and it's not gonna come and totally be this upheaval that people kind of speculate it will be. That's really my perspective.
We also heard the same thing about NFTs though. Like we heard exactly the same thing about this is going to be exactly how we monetize everything, and it's going to make sure that everything that we work with is going to be non-fungible and everything like that. And it's, did it? All it's used for was just
overpriced
overpriced JPEGs, and it was and scams, and that was all it was. And kind of I look at who's excited by Gen AI stuff, and the people I respect who make art aren't the people that are excited by it. It's the people that I kind of look at and go, yeah, you did a lot of talking about NFTs. Yeah, you've done a lot of talking about AR in the past. You've done a lot of talking about stuff that turns out to be kind of a bit vaporware-ish.
Yeah.
And so for now, I'm kind of still on that. I mean, I'm coming. I have quite strong feelings because of, as I said, my weird passion about the integrity of journalistic imagery.
Yeah.
I'm perfectly happy to be proved wrong. I just don't think at the moment we're there. I think, I don't necessarily think that we'll be at a point where everything that we see is generative AI. Because I think if you start looking at how people are reacting to it now, we're now getting to the point where
there's the backlash.
The general public are kind of just so bored of their Facebook feed being just weird generative AI stuff that's misinformation. Yeah. And now that there's no fact checkers, it kind of goes even worse. And so we've kind of taken this swing further into not really being able to tell if anything's real again.
Right.
And so then that's going to kind of, the pendulum's going to have to come back again, and people are going to be like, well, I want to see stuff that's real. I want to see art made by real people. I want to see pictures taken by real people. I want to see films made by people who are passionate about the subject.
Yeah.
And I think we kind of, Gen AI has swung out here for a bit. It will come back. It will be a tool that helps creatives in some way, and helps people who are less creative to be a bit more creative, and kind of maybe the ultimate functionality of it is that when you're getting briefed by a client, they can send you visuals to show what they're thinking.
Right.
And maybe that means they're more inclined to actually give you a proper brief, and that would be helpful for everyone.
Yeah. I think that's a great place to stop. That was a nice high note to end on. Where can everybody find you?
I'm on quite a lot of different social media. The main one that I use is Instagram, which is at Kris Wood, KrisWould, because I love a pun. And then my website is kiswd.com. So it's my name, no vowels.
All right. Amazing. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
No problem. Thank you so much for this.
Have you on again soon. Yeah,
perfect. Really great to meet you.
You too. Hang on a second.
Cool.